Dear colleagues, good time of the day to you. It is a pleasure to be chairing this session on item 9, Biodiversity and Health. I remind you that this agenda item was not on the agenda of the informal session of SBSTTA in February. Therefore, we'll begin with the very first reading of this agenda item. The SBSTTA Bureau decided to defer the first reading of this agenda item to allow a 6-week period from the posting of the document. The pre-session document, which includes a draft global action plan for biodiversity and health, was updated and published following a peer review process on the draft global action plan, which received 29 submissions from parties and observers. I am delighted that we're finally able to open the plenary session on this agenda item. At this point, please also note that there'll be no time to consider a CRP during this part of the SBSTTA-24 session. The CRP for this agenda item will be considered when SBSTTA reconvenes at a later date. Colleagues, before I open the floor, I would like to remind you that we are on a very tight schedule and that the time remaining to us is extremely limited. Therefore, I would like to ensure that we complete this item within the next 2 hours. As you may recall, interventions by parties are limited to 3 minutes. 5 minutes on behalf of regional groups, 2 minutes for non-parties and observers, and 4 minutes on behalf of major groups. I thank you in advance for your comprehension and collaboration. I will now give the floor to the Secretary to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. On item 9, Biodiversity and Health, the Secretariat has prepared documents CBD/SBSTTA/24/9, Biodiversity and Health, to report on actions taken pursuant to Decision 14/4. The document has 4 sections that together present background from Decision 14/4, a contextualization with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, a summary of activities undertaken in response to requests to the Executive Secretary, and a draft recommendation for consideration by the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice. Its annex presents a global action plan for biodiversity and health. This document is complemented by 2 information documents as follows: CBD/SBSTTA/24/INF/25, supporting guidance and tools on biodiversity and health interlinkages and One Health approaches, CBD/SBSTTA/24/INF/26, compilation of key messages and approaches to biodiversity and health interlinkages. The subsidiary body will be invited to consider these documents and provide a recommendation to the Conference of the Parties, inter alia, on the endorsement of a global action plan for biodiversity and health. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I will now open the floor for interventions, starting with regional groups, followed by parties, then non-parties, then major stakeholder groups and observers. I will now open the floor to regions. I know that we are supposed to have Ukraine representing the CEE. Portugal, are you giving yes, Ukraine. Ukraine, you may have the floor now. Thank you.
Countries of Central and Eastern Europe, I would like to present our regional statement. We fully share these views and arguments contained in the document just presented, and that biodiversity and human health are closely linked, and the loss of and degradation of biodiversity undermines the life support system, increase the risk of transmission of diseases from wild animals to human. We also fully aware that mainstreaming biodiversity in the health sector and leveraging the mutual benefits for biodiversity and health are crucial to preventing biodiversity loss and implementing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and achieving the goals and targets of various multilateral agreements and international processes, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We recognize a serious threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has further demonstrated the need to re-establish human connectivity and better than before recovery to reduce the risk of future zoonotic pandemics. Therefore, we welcome and endorse the proposed recommendation in Section 4, and as well as the Global Biodiversity and Health Action Plan presented in the Annex, which is a good basis for planning and implementing further detailed and more specific activities. The plan includes all direction and actions to be taken, including the following strategic objective: raise awareness and understanding of the linkages between biodiversity and health in order to stimulate transformation and behavioral change at all levels, including through educational programs. We believe that raising awareness, preparing and using ad hoc, easy to understand and informative reference materials for this purpose, based on scientific research and intended for all sectors of society, is one of the most important tools for achieving these goals, especially in the condition of COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, it is advisable to pay more attention to this topic. For example, to the proposed recommendations, section 4, a phrase could be inserted, where the Conference of the Parties, among other measures, recognizes the important role of action to raise public awareness as one of the most effective ways to achieve the goal of combating biodiversity loss, which will help prevent and reduce the risk of future zoonotic pandemics. We would like to focus on the capacity building and financing issues raised in the plan and their importance, especially for development and transition economies. In this regard, we would like to note that in the document, the need for cooperation and assistance should be defined for both developing and countries with economies in transition. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ukraine, on behalf of the CEE region. I see Portugal. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Portugal wishes to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the background documents. We welcome the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, considering that it is of high quality and has improved significantly.
Excuse me, Portugal, just 1 second. May I ask, are you giving a regional statement?
No.
No, you're giving, okay, so just give me one second and then I get back to you. Thank you so much. So I'm just verifying that there are no more regional statements. Okay, I see no hands up. Okay, so now I'll officially open the floor for interventions from parties. We will start with Portugal and then we will move on to the others. Okay, so Portugal first, you have the floor, followed by Colombia, then Spain. So Portugal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Portugal wishes to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the background documents. We welcome the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, considering that it is of high quality and has improved significantly based on inputs collected during the peer review process. However, we still intend to submit some general remarks and amendments. We also consider that Appendix 2 of the Action Plan includes important information to prevent new pandemics and should therefore be given more prominence in order to raise awareness to the importance of its content. Portugal would like to stress the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity in all the health sectors as a component of the long-term approach to mainstreaming biodiversity. We would also like to emphasize the need of implementing the One Health approach to stress the importance of nature's health. We believe that a biodiversity inclusive and holistic approach is needed. In this context, the draft Global Action Plan can be seen as a way to operationalize the biodiversity inclusive One Health transition put forward in the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook. Portugal is of the view that biodiversity and health linkages and the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health should be better reflected in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and its monitoring framework, especially regarding indicators. Portugal fully recognizes that the causes that led to the loss of ongoing degradation of biodiversity are often the same that have increased and continue to increase the risk of pandemics, promoting phenomena such as spillovers from wildlife populations. Indeed, the loss of biodiversity creates more vulnerable ecosystems that can result in an increased risk of disease outbreaks. Additionally, Portugal believes that biodiversity and ecosystem services play a key role in our health and well-being, both physical and mental. Moreover, biodiversity underpins health and other related sectors, including pharmacy, biotechnology, agriculture, tourism, and leisure. Thus, the loss of biodiversity can affect the future of these sectors. Finally, Portugal would like to invite the co-chairs of the open-ended working group to take into consideration when developing the first draft of the post-2020 GBF, the discussions on biodiversity and health during this virtual meeting of Subsidiary 24, as well as a draft global action plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal. I have a reminder from our translators that we need to take our time when we're speaking. Yes, we have limited time, but we still want to be able to hear everyone. So now we'll have Colombia followed by Spain, then Sweden. I give the floor to Colombia. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Madam Chair. Colombia reconoce los vínculos entre salud.
Colombia recognizes the linkages between human health and the health of ecosystems. To the extent that ecosystems are abundant, functional, and healthy, they contribute to maintaining human health, food security, and also to address the issue of climate change. However, Colombia wishes to express its concern about the fact that this working paper was made available so late to the parties. So given this, we very much support recognition of the One Health approach as a guiding element to address the global crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, and pandemics. Likewise, we actively participated in the peer review of the draft Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health. We're pleased to see that the majority of the suggestions were included in the new draft as an annex to the document CVD/Substa/24/9. We still wish to make a few suggestions that were not initially dealt with, as well as some new suggestions related to the following: implementation milestones, mainstreaming in all the COP priority sectors, access to genetic resources and benefit sharing, financing and indicators, which we have sent in writing to the Secretariat. Generally speaking, we support the adoption of the action plan with the requested modifications included in the annex. And we would like to highlight the following three suggestions to the draft recommendation and its annex. First of all, in paragraph 2, it is important to highlight that in order to prevent future pandemics, decision-taking should be based on scientific evidence, and therefore we suggest including at the end of the paragraph the following reference: takes note of the report on the IPBES expert workshop on biodiversity and pandemics. And secondly, include a paragraph after paragraph 3 in which reference is made to the need to mobilize resources and build capacities to implement the action plan in the following terms: invites GEF, donors, and other organizations to offer technical and financial support to the parties for the effective implementation of the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. And then thirdly, Madam Chair, when it comes to the establishment and measuring of milestones, this should take place before the plan is finalised. Therefore, we suggest that the milestone should be measured within an earlier time period, for example, 2025. And so we need to adjust all these references in the annex as follows: implementation milestones for monitoring purposes by 2025. Thank you, dear Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. We will now have Spain, followed by Sweden, and then New Zealand. If you notice, I'm going to try and help those folks who are having it a bit more difficult than us to go a bit earlier. So just bear with me today. So we'll now hear from Spain, followed by Sweden, then New Zealand. Spain, you have the floor. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Spain believes that the interlinkages between biodiversity and health must be properly reflected in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as established in GBO 5. One of the transitions required to achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature is the transition towards a biodiversity inclusive One Health approach. Within this context, we welcome the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, and we support the recommendation for this to be adopted at COP15 and that it should be a key tool that contributes to achieving the post-2020 framework by channeling and catalyzing the transition towards a biodiversity inclusive One Health approach and contributing to the sector-specific mainstreaming of biodiversity, in this case within the health sector. Spain appreciates with a great deal of interest the outcomes of the seminar workshop on biodiversity and pandemics that was organised by IPBES, and also the key messages that are recorded in Appendix 3 of the draft Global Action Plan. We underlined the importance of avoiding deterioration of biodiversity and degradation of ecosystems as a necessary path to reduce the zoonotic risk and prevent future pandemics. At the same time, we recognise the importance for humans' physical and mental health of having contact with green and blue biodiverse rich spaces. Finally, Spain wishes to request that the discussions on this agenda item be included in SBSTTA's report to the co-chairs of the OEWG on the post-2020 framework in order for it to be considered in the development of the new post-2020 draft framework plan for the 5th of July. And we would also like to support what has just been said by Portugal. And we have submitted some specific comments in writing on the annex and the draft recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Spain. We'll now have Sweden, followed by New Zealand, then Canada. Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sweden would like to thank the CBD Secretariat for the long-awaited documents on health and biodiversity. We would have wished that this important topic that is currently defining our life, as well as related lessons learned to build back better towards transformative change, would have had a higher priority on SBSTTA's agenda. Sweden welcomes the key messages on mainstreaming biodiversity linkages and the IPBES workshop report on biodiversity in pandemics, and would like to highlight that similar findings were already published in the IPBES Global Assessment and in UNEP's report on preventing the next pandemic. All parties have agreed on the 2050 vision to sustain a healthy planet to deliver benefits essential for all people. We are therefore concerned that a biodiversity-inclusive One Health approach has not been better integrated into the latest draft of the GBF and its monitoring framework. We need to address the anthropogenic drivers on zoonosis emergence and biodiversity loss, including habitat loss and the trade and use of wild species. Further, we need to better reflect that the interdependence between a healthy environment and human well-being includes several human rights and equity-related questions that also need to be recognized in this context. In line with Portugal and Spain, Sweden would like to invite the Open-Ended Working Group co-chairs to consider document 24.9, including its annexes, for the development of the first draft of the GBF, and we ask the CBD Secretariat to recognize this request in the report for SBSTTA-24. We welcome the revised draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health and support recommendations for its improvement from the virtual European Film Expert Meeting. Further, Sweden would like to recall COP Decision 14.4 that invited the CBD Secretariat the WHO, and other related organizations to develop integrated science-based indicators, metrics, progress measurement tools on biodiversity and health. We believe that related sections in the document 24.9 and in the action plan need further work. The draft monitoring framework for the GBF is currently not reflecting this issue sufficiently and cannot be used to measure progress towards the action plan. SBSTA should therefore request the CBD Secretariat and invite the WHO and relevant organizations to continue the work on health and biodiversity-related indicators in line with Decision 14.4 to better inform the discussions at Open-Ended Working Group 3. This request should also be reflected in the SBSTA report. We have submitted further text proposals for the draft recommendations and the action plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Sweden. We now have New Zealand, followed by Canada, then Belgium. New Zealand, you may have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. New Zealand welcomes and supports the draft recommendations and the draft Global Action Plan. We commend the Secretariat for progressing this very important piece of work. We note that the One Health approach seeks to address some very pressing and important issues, which are highly complex by nature. As such, the development of the appropriate systems for the elements of the action plan will take time to establish. Some of the indicators may be challenging to measure and report on. That said, we need to work through these issues collaboratively and providing support where needed. We support the 6 main elements of the Global Action Plan and particularly welcome the inclusion of planning and surveillance, scientific research, and capacity building in the plan. We also note and welcome the specific reference to consideration being given to the expertise of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We would ask for one minor amendment in the draft action plan. This is under element 5 in the first paragraph. We ask that the last part be amended to the following. So it would say, and taking into consideration the knowledge and skills of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, New Zealand. We'll now have Canada, followed by Belgium, and then Indonesia. Canada, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada thanks the Executive Secretary and Secretariat colleagues for their work on supporting and highlighting the critical linkages between biodiversity and human health, including by convening the special virtual session last December. However, we must express our disappointment that this key SBSTA document annexing the revised draft Global Plan of Action was not made available to parties 6 weeks before the opening of the meeting to allow for appropriate analysis and consultations. Regrettably, we are thus unable to provide our official views at this meeting and can only offer some overarching observations. Canada feels that a concrete plan of action under the CBD will help to strengthen and consolidate the biodiversity pillar, which has often been underrepresented in the One Health discussion. It's critical to address environmental health issues linked to air, water, and soil pollution, environmental and ecosystem degradation, biodiversity loss, climate change, and to understand the effect of environmental health factors on health for the prevention of zoonoses and of chronic and non-communicable diseases and for pandemic resilience and recovery. In general, we welcome the ideas put forth in the draft plan and feel it will contribute to better collaboration and coordination efforts at all levels. We would welcome any further opportunities to discuss alignment and complementarity with other One Health international initiatives that are currently being discussed to ensure our collective efforts are efficient and not duplicative. We are pleased to notice the more gender-responsive approach evident in the revised draft. We know that the impacts of biodiversity loss are felt more severely by women and that there are a number of health concerns that impact women differently. We note also that because many subnational governments are directly responsible for healthcare systems, as well as biodiversity and health issues, as is especially clear during the current pandemic, their role and involvement should be reflected appropriately throughout the Global Plan of Action. We look forward to contributing constructively to the discussions on this item at COP. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. We'll now hear from Belgium, followed by Indonesia, then the Netherlands. Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Belgium welcomes the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health and thanks the Secretariat for the significant improvements introduced following the peer review process. Belgium would like to stress the key importance of biodiversity and health linkages and interdependencies as demonstrated by the current pandemic and of the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. As several speakers before us, Belgium therefore recommends fully integrating recognition of the issue throughout the Global Biodiversity Framework and its monitoring framework. Belgium suggests that the open-ended working group co-chairs take this into account for a global enhanced consideration of the biodiversity and health synergies and improved actions on the long term. Belgium also would like to stress the importance of biodiversity-inclusive, holistic and transdisciplinary One Health approach, and welcomes that the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook underlines the importance of operationalizing of the biodiversity-inclusive One Health transition. Finally, Madam Chair, Belgium would like to highlight the significance of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in order to fully enjoy its ecosystem services and well-being benefits. It is all the more crucial to avoid, or if not possible, minimize, adverse impacts on biodiversity to prevent further negative repercussions on health and societies. We will share further detailed comments in writing with the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll now hear from the Netherlands, followed by, we'll now hear from Indonesia, followed by Netherlands and then Mexico. Indonesia, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, on agenda item 9, Biodiversity and Health, Indonesia appreciates the Secretariat for highlighting this crucial issue again. Current COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the importance of biodiversity and health. Those have a strong correlative with zoonotic origin of the virus that has infected millions of people and disrupt global economics. Biodiversity holds a centric role in human, animal, and environmental health. As one of the world's mega biodiversity, Indonesia is aware of the threat of emerging infectious diseases, which may occur anytime, anywhere. The transmission of this disease indeed has no boundary. Although it is still rare, the risk emerging infectious diseases has been the subject of several studies conducted by universities, international agencies, think tanks, and the government of the parties. Therefore, Indonesia supports the 6 key elements in the annex as action plan to biodiversity and health. This will help in structuring the strategy customized to each country's condition. On the annex of the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health on the element 2, Indonesia furthermore would like to highlight the rationale on one of the drivers of unsustainable food consumption from wildlife that is related to bigger issues including wildlife trade. Therefore, it is timely for all of us to call for to establish more legal framework and policies, not only between international, regional, and national agencies, as stated in element number 1 on cross-sectoral mainstreaming, but also between international conventions related to wildlife trade, especially CITES, WHO, FAO, and OIE. This synergy is highly necessary to reduce the risk of pathogen transfer either between wildlife species or from animals to humans, which may lead to human transfer and later country to country. Lastly, Indonesia also calls for a stronger risk assessment on wildlife activities. Our aim is that this will be inseparable to efforts to prevent new emerging infectious diseases. Therefore, Indonesia is willing to cooperate and partake in active engagement with relevant stakeholders as part of the One Health approach for wise sustainable use of biodiversity and health management. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. We will now hear from Netherlands, followed by Mexico and China. Netherlands, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As the Best Pandemics Workshop report states, measures that reduce unsustainable exploitation of high biodiversity regions will reduce the wildlife-wildstock-human contact interface and help prevent the spillover of new pathogens. The causes that lead to the loss and ongoing degradation of biodiversity are often the same that have increased and continue to increase the risk of pandemics. Added to that, the current COVID-19 pandemic pointed out clearly that people, and specifically urban dwellers, need nature for mental and physical well-being. In the Netherlands, we saw visitation numbers of natural areas increase significantly. The linkages between biodiversity and health are perfectly clear. Having this in mind, the Netherlands welcomes the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. Still, we need to consult wider and might propose in a physical meeting some general remarks and some proposals for amendments. And we already have submitted our amendments to the draft recommendation in writing. We find that Appendix 2 of the Action Plan on options to integrate biodiversity considerations into COVID-19 stimulus and recovery measures should be positioned more prominently in order to raise awareness for the acute importance of its content. The Netherlands is of the opinion that the issue of biodiversity and health linkages and Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health should be distinctly reflected in the GBF and in its monitoring framework. We therefore share the view with Portugal, Spain and others that the co-chairs should take the discussions on biodiversity and health and the Global Action Plan during this session into consideration when developing the first draft of the GBF. The invitation to the co-chairs to do so should be reflected in the report of this Substa meeting. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Netherlands. We'll now hear from Mexico, followed by China, then the UK. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico considers that recognizing the complex interlinkages between biodiversity and health is key to move ahead with actions that address diverse problems caused by environmental degradation. Even although the health effects of environmental degradation and biodiversity loss are felt more in groups in vulnerable situations, the COVID-19 pandemic has made it clear that everyone can be impacted. Thus, we are in favour of the production of the Global Action Plan to mainstream linkages between biodiversity and health in public policy strategies and programmes through the One Health approach. However, we have a few comments on this plan. First of all, we consider that its structure needs to be revised so that the components are organised in a clearer, more uniform way. We have also observed that in some cases there's an indication of activities that are then subdivided, whereas for others they're broken down in a different way. And there's only milestones established for one of the elements. This is not the case for the other elements. Secondly, we recommend improving the figure diagram that accompanies the plan so that it explicitly lays out the different elements that are part of it, and also the interlinkage with biodiversity. Thirdly, Mexico welcomes the indication of the sectors that should be involved. However, we have taken note of the fact that in some cases there is no direct relationship with the health sector and biodiversity. Fourthly, there's a reference made to the effect of climate change on biodiversity and human health. However, it only addresses general questions related to the direct and indirect impacts on human health. Turning now to the draft recommendation, we suggest the inclusion of the World Animal Health Organization, as well as the UN FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, to continue this collaboration with the Convention through the recently established One Health High-Level Expert Council. Also, there needs to be the correct use of the term sustainable use of biodiversity and the inclusion of nature-based solutions with ecosystem-based approaches. The suggested proposals for the recommendation will be sent in writing. We hope that we will have an opportunity to discuss all the different comments from the parties in the near future. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. We'll now hear from China, followed by the UK, then Switzerland. China, you have the floor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. China has recognized the linkages between biodiversity and health and welcomed the preparation of the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. We have also noticed that the updated version of the action plan has integrated more detailed information compared to the peer-reviewed one and highlight the scientific contribution and the cooperation under the mandate of CBD. We would like to express our gratitude to the Secretariat for the great efforts. Regarding to the current draft, we would like to provide a few additional comments. First of all, in page 4, paragraph 20, the concept of building of a community of common health for mankind could also be highlighted in parallel to the Build Back Better in order to emphasize its contribution to human beings. Secondly, we have noticed that the action plan has referenced the IP-based workshop report on biodiversity and pandemics for multiple times. For example, in page 4, 5, 9, 10, and 34. We have discussed the nature of this report yesterday on CRP6 and before. This workshop report is not an official deliverable, which has not been reviewed, endorsed, or approved by the plenary of IP-base, and only a limited number of experts attend. Considering about the procedure, we hope the Secretary could take corresponding changes in line with the discussion result of item 8 on IP base. Thirdly, in page 12, paragraph 17a, the concept of right to a healthy environment has not been unified globally. In order to avoid any misunderstanding, we suggest to delete this sentence or change as individual and communities. Firstly, page 20, element 3.1.5, we hope to emphasize as illegal trade because the deforestation and the wildlife exploitation are all unsustainable activities. The above are Chinese statements we hope the Secretariat could take into consideration, and we will submit a written statement later. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. Just to note that we recognize Argentina's concern. They posted a message in the chat indicating they're having the connectivity difficulties. We see you're in the list, and we note that you're having a problem, and we hope that when we get to you, we'll be able to hear you. But if not, we will try and put you in if you're able to connect with us. Maybe we'll put you in earlier. Please signal to us when your line is good, and maybe we'll put you earlier. Okay, so Argentina, your message is noted. But for now, we will have UK, followed by Switzerland, then Germany. UK, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The UK thanks the Secretariat for preparing the document CBD Subsidiary 24/9. The UK has 4 points to make. Firstly, the interlinkages between biodiversity, health, and pandemic risk must be addressed within the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As other parties have noted, we therefore recommend that the co-chairs of the open-ended working group take the discussions here in SBSTA into consideration when developing the first draft of the framework. Secondly, we welcome the draft recommendation and the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, but would like to suggest some amendments and other issues for further consideration. For instance, the draft Global Action Plan suggests in paragraphs 1 and 24 that its progress can be monitored using selected indicators from the post-2020 monitoring framework. We believe further consideration is needed on how this will be achieved without creating additional reporting burdens and noting the availability of suitable indicators in the monitoring framework, and the need for flexibility at the national level. Thirdly, as other parties have noted, we feel that mainstreaming of biodiversity is critical for the promotion of an integrated approach to health issues, and we ask that reference to this be made in the document to align this draft decision with the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming under consideration in SBI. Finally, further clarity is needed on how the proposed actions build on existing COP decisions and complement other decisions being considered at COP15, including the post-2020 GBF, the LTAM as reference, the long-term strategy on capacity development, avoiding duplication or conflicts with these other agendas. We have provided suggested amendments in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. We will now hear from Switzerland, followed by Germany, then Finland. Switzerland, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Biodiversity and health are closely interlinked across a wide range of scales. The COVID-19 pandemic brings even more light into this interdependence and further highlights the need to re-establish an equilibrium in the relationship between people and nature. Switzerland is of the view that a holistic approach will be central in tackling the current pandemic and future health challenges. In this context, the One Health approach can be of value as it brings together expertise in medical, veterinary, and environmental issues and supports governments, companies, and civil society in ensuring human, animal, and environmental health. Regarding the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, overall, Switzerland supports the draft action plan as it aims to catalyze the mainstreaming of biodiversity and health linkages and to accelerate efforts towards a biodiversity inclusive One Health transition. However, we would like to highlight the following points. In our view, the draft action plan includes very ambitious strategic objectives for the proposed timeframe until 2030, which may be challenging to achieve. We therefore suggest slightly modified language on paragraph 14 of the draft plan. Switzerland welcomes the inclusion of mainstreaming and synergies among the relevant processes and their importance in the advancement of biodiversity and health issues. In this regard, we suggest to explicitly mention the importance of relevant multilateral agreements. On the suggested recommendations of document CBD/SBSTA/24/9. In general, we support the draft recommendations, but would like to highlight the following point. In the first preambular paragraph, we suggest to use language that is more inclusive in order to relate to health-related activities in general, rather than just the human health sector. We have submitted these and additional changes in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. We will now hear from Germany, followed by Japan, then Finland. Germany, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Germany would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the pre-session document on biodiversity and health and the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health annexed to this document. The COVID-19 pandemic reminds us that biodiversity and ecosystem services are essential for both physical and mental human health and well-being. Easily accessible green and blue spaces within cities and their surrounding landscapes have provided valuable places of retreat during last year's challenging times. Germany welcomes the report of the IPBES workshop on biodiversity and pandemics as an important contribution to the global discussion on the complex connections between human health, biodiversity loss, and climate change. It is of utmost importance to tackle these planetary emergencies in an integrated way. Therefore, we would like to emphasize the relevance of the One Health approach and other holistic concepts, encompassing the interlinkages between human, animal, and environmental health. The IPBES workshop report has told us clearly that the cost of pandemic prevention is only a small fraction of the cost of pandemics and their economic and social impacts. Therefore, it is important to take preventive action now. In this regard, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework needs to show that we have learned from this crisis and are equipped better for the future. The linkages between biodiversity and health need to be better reflected in the GBF and its monitoring framework. This should be documented in the report of this meeting and be brought to the attention of the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. Germany welcomes the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health and finds that it is of good quality and even has improved by the review process. We especially like to highlight Appendix 2, which provides important options to integrate biodiversity considerations into stimulus and recovery measures in response to COVID-19, to contribute to sustainable development and reduce the risk of future pandemics. We will hand in our proposals for a few minor amendments to the draft recommendation and the draft Global Action Plan in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Germany. We will now hear from Japan, then Finland, followed by the EU. Japan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan underlines the importance of this item to strengthen our work related to interlinkages between biodiversity and health. It is important to develop a global action plan for biodiversity and health, and its current draft is a good starting point for our discussion. However, most of the written actions seem to be what previous discussions and decisions of the CBD covered. In this regard, it is hard to see which parts, actions of the plan are new based on the latest situation, including the COVID-19. Hence, ideally, this plan could highlight new and additional actions and measures more clearly. Simultaneously, where possible, more quantitative information with appropriate citations could be added so that the plan can be informative and reliable. We submitted such comments in the peer review process this spring, and we see that some improvements were made in the current draft plan after the process. However, we still think that further improvements can make this plan more practical. Speaking of more specific text, in paragraph 19 in the action plan draft, in the annex, it is written that the Secretariat of the CBD would ensure that duplication with existing organizations and initiatives is avoided. In this respect, we think that it is necessary to clarify the mandates of the CBD on the issue of biodiversity and health in comparison with other relevant international organizations, and also to identify what the CBD can and should do to contribute to the One Health approach. Thus, in operational paragraph 5, under the suggested recommendation, we would like to propose an additional subparagraph between subparagraphs B and C as follows: to review mandate and main work of the Executive Secretary, together with the relevant organizations, to promote a biodiversity-inclusive One Health approach. We then expect that the result of the review will be reported to the Subsidiary before COP16. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. We will now take interventions from Finland, followed by the EU, then Brazil. Finland, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Finland welcomes the work done in relation to health and biodiversity and encourages continued involvement by the WHO, the World Organization for Animal Health, FAO, and the other biodiversity-related conventions. The COVID-19 pandemic has seriously affected all of us. As biodiversity is continually being lost and degraded, the risk for pandemics increases both through human-induced risks as spillovers from wildlife populations to people. Moreover, the pandemics has shown us the importance of timely sharing of pathogen data for public health as already carried out in the PIP framework. The current COVID-19 pandemic has also shown that people need nature. This has led to significant increases in visitation numbers in protected and other natural areas as people looked for mental and physical well-being in nature during the lockdowns. There is scientific evidence that living near nature and connecting to it can prevent diseases and speed recovery from illness. Microbe-rich environments can reduce the development of allergies and thus reduce health costs. Biodiversity is the base for many sectors, such as pharmacy, biotechnology, and agriculture, and thus our health. The loss and degradation of biodiversity can affect the future of these sectors. To tackle the loss and degradation of biodiversity, we need a whole-of-society approach. Biodiversity needs to be mainstreamed in all sectors, including in the health sector, and we need to work on the indicators for measuring progress, actions, and the level of ambition. Finland welcomes the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health as means for operationalizing the biodiversity inclusive One Health approach. This approach is crucial to tackle, for instance, antimicrobial resistance and to promote safe life and to fulfill the SDGs. In line with this, biodiversity and health linkages and the draft global action plans for biodiversity and health need to be reflected better in the post-global biodiversity framework, as also stated by Spain, Portugal, Netherlands, Germany, Colombia, and others. The peer review process improved the draft global action plan for biodiversity and health. However, we do have some proposals for amendments to the draft recommendation and the draft global action plan in itself. We will provide these amendments in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Finland. Because Argentina's system is working right this minute, we will take them next. So pardon us, EU, we'll have you after Argentina. So Argentina, please take the floor. Thank you.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much for giving us the floor at the moment, given that we're having connection issues amongst the three delegates that are participating for Argentina in this meeting. So first of all, we'd like to express our concern for the late publication of the document that we're considering. Postponing agenda items once meetings have got underway is not an acceptable solution for Argentina and does not comply with the modus operandi provisions of this subsidiary body. And respecting procedural norms is particularly important in current context and even more important when dealing with such pressing items as this one. Notwithstanding all of this, we would like to make a few preliminary comments while awaiting an additional opportunity to hold negotiations on this document. This pandemic has pushed to the forefront the linkages between biodiversity and health, a nexus recognized in Argentina's national constitution, which enshrines the right to health. Is required and holistic, multicultural way as suggested in the One Health approach. This implies recognition of the link between biodiversity loss and the emergence and re-emergence of diseases. It also means that we have to consider the crossover between the emergence of these diseases and other factors such as intensive livestock rearing, situations of poverty and social vulnerability. Unequal responses to COVID-19 in each of our countries has shown that the occurrence of pandemics can be linked to the loss or unsustainable use of biodiversity, but it's also related to culture, traditions, and different capacities in states to prevent, control, and treat new infections. The unequal global vaccine distribution speaks volumes about this complex situation. Developed countries seem to be moving towards the final act of this pandemic thanks to successful vaccination campaigns, whereas the situation in developing countries is far from being under control due to vaccine scarcity. Yes, of course, there's the speaker. So as I've said, the unequal global vaccine distribution speaks volume about this complex situation. Developed countries seem to be moving towards the final act of the pandemic thanks to their successful vaccination campaigns, whereas the situation in developing countries is far from being under control due to vaccine scarcity. That is why the Global Biodiversity and Health Plan should be analysed in detail. Our contribution to the prevention of new diseases of zoonotic origin should take account of the competencies of other environmental agreements, the WHO and the OIE, and promote actions to strengthen epidemiological surveillance, early warning systems, and risk analysis and access, and fair sharing of the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. And this should be combined with a commitment from developed countries to promote the means of implementation needed for developing countries. In light of these considerations, we would assert that big changes need to be made to the draft recommendation and its annexes that seem to disregard the social and economic dimensions of the One Health approach. Thus, we suggest putting all of the annex documents in square brackets that need to be negotiated in detail by the parties. Chair, we hope that we're able to participate in this discussion and listen to more interventions, even though we haven't been able to do it so far because of our connection issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Argentina. We'll now take interventions from the EU, Brazil, followed by France. EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The EU would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of this agenda item and all related documents. The EU supports the statements by Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Belgium, Netherlands, UK, Germany and Finland. We find that the draft action plan is of high quality and has improved significantly based on inputs collected during the peer review. Considering this, we support its endorsement by parties at COP15. We have, however, some general remarks and some proposals for amendments, which we will also submit in writing. We find that the appendices 2 options to integrate biodiversity considerations into COVID-19 stimulus and recovery measures and Appendix 3 key messages on mainstreaming biodiversity and health linkages of the action plan deliver important information. Therefore, we find that they should feature more prominently in order to raise the awareness of the importance of their content. We would like to stress the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity in the health sector as a component of the long-term approach on biodiversity and health. We welcome the IPBES expert workshop report on biodiversity and pandemics and the World Health Organization report on nature, biodiversity and health. Finally, we consider the issue of health and biodiversity linkages should be better reflected in the Global Biodiversity Framework and its monitoring framework. We would like that this request is reflected in the report of Subsidiary 24 meeting to the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, EU. We will now have Brazil, followed by France, then Chile. Brazil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's nice to see you again. Brazil would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing document Subsidiary-24/9. At the same time, we share the concerns raised by Canada and Argentina regarding the fact that a draft plan of action was only made available 1 week before the beginning of the formal sessions, thus leaving little time for an in-depth analysis. We also support China's position regarding the reference on the workshop on biodiversity pandemics. From our perspective, the social and economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic have demonstrated that the capacity to respond to health emergencies is unevenly distributed across countries, in particular between developed and developing countries. Thus, the pandemic provides a compelling reminder that to promote a holistic approach to health, we need to achieve a balanced implementation of the 3 pillars of the Convention. In this regard, Brazil believes the draft action plan still requires significant improvement. And we have to ensure security in line with SDGs. Furthermore, we have been surprised by the lack of reference to the 3rd pillar of the Convention. From our vantage point, the major scientific and technological developments in health-related sectors over the past decades were only made possible by accessing genetic resources. Therefore, the draft action plan needs to recognize the urgent need to strengthen compliance with ABS provisions and increase benefit sharing. On a similar note, the draft action plan should also emphasize the role of biotechnology and biotechnological research, which have been an indispensable tool to respond to health emergencies, including as possible example, vaccine development. In addition, Brazil would like to express its concern that some of the activities proposed within the action plan, such as those under Element 4, fall beyond the scope of CBD's mandate. Moreover, we would like to highlight once again the concepts that lack a multilaterally agreed upon definition, such as nature-based solutions, should be deleted from the document. Finally, Brazil understands that further work under the Convention on Biodiversity and Health needs to be fully consistent with other relevant international initiatives, in particular the World Organization for Animal Health and the Codex Alimentarius. Accordingly, to tap into the benefits of biodiversity sustainable use for human health, we should recognize the importance of ensuring the highest levels of sanitary standards in products of animal origin for human consumption and providing capacity building for producers in this regard. We will submit a number of written comments with specific text proposals, and we share the position of Argentina that this document requires significant negotiation prior to its adoption. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Brazil. We'll now take interventions from France, Chile, then Bangladesh. France, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. France thanks the Secretariat for the preparation and quality of the documents. France supports the European Union Declaration. France is generally satisfied with the draft action plan, which is ambitious for biodiversity and health, whether human, animal, or environmental health. The peer-reviewed version has been considerably improved, in particular with the inclusion of pollution in all aspects: air, soil, water, work, etc. France strongly defends a strengthened One Health approach, in particular through the establishment of the One Health High-Level Expert Panel, OHHLEP, and the PREZODE initiative. It welcomes the multidimensional approach of the draft Global Action Plan, which includes the conservation and restoration of biodiversity as such, and for its own sake, and not just for the services that social ecosystems can provide to humanity. For this reason, France suggests using the definition of the United Nations Environment Programme, and also suggests that a definition of One Health be included in the glossary of the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. This definition refers to a cross-cutting and systemic approach to health based on the fact that human and animal health are interdependent and linked to the health of the ecosystems in which they coexist. Finally, France welcomes the fact that the draft action plan is based on the integration of the links between biodiversity and health in a multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and ecosystem approach at all levels of policy development and implementation, as well as in research and among all stakeholders. It thus emphasizes the co-benefits of health and biodiversity. In so doing, it provides a good basis for achieving a healthy life in harmony with nature. Nevertheless, France would like to see the issue of the linkages between health and biodiversity be better reflected in the global biodiversity framework and in its monitoring framework, and supports the statements of Spain, Portugal, Finland, Switzerland, and UK in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, France. We will now hear from Chile, followed by Bangladesh, then Costa Rica. Chile, the floor is yours. Chile?
Can you hear me? For Chile, a transdisciplinary intersectoral approach needs to be developed that recognizes the intrinsic connection between human health, animal health, and health in general, and nature resilience, and consequently the well-being and sustenance of all living beings, including human beings, animals and plants, as well as to prevent and counter future pandemics. We urge parties to recognise that biodiversity loss negatively affects the health sector, and on the other hand, the health sector has potential effects on biodiversity that endanger the provision of the functions and services of the ecosystems that are essential for humanity. In order to bring about and promote transformative change, there needs to be joint efforts undertaken by all parties to take up a One Health approach and promote mainstreaming thereof. So we welcome the report on the workshop on biodiversity and pandemics that was convened by IPBES. And we also support approval in COP15 of the Global Action Plan and its implementation and policies, plans and existing strategies by the parties. So we think it is necessary to urge parties and other governments and relevant stakeholders to control the generation of common drivers of the loss and deterioration of biodiversity, climate change, and also promote better health and well-being outcomes. So when it comes to applying the One Health approach and the Global Action Plan, there needs to be short-term stimulus measures and longer-term approaches to contribute to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And we need to consider granting financial support to least developed countries, small island developing states, and also countries with economies in transition. The efforts of the parties should be structured based on participation and inclusion, with the effective inclusion of all of the direct stakeholders, with the participation of IPLCs, women, young people and elders, guaranteeing incorporation of a non-discriminatory perspective, a gender perspective and adequate representation. And the parties need to have practices that are based on capacity building and that lead to the implementation of open standards for conservation and promote and stimulate practices and solutions for health based on nature. We'd like to invite parties to define objectives, targets and components and indicators that are solid, ambitious and attainable, and that are coherent and are related with what has been established in the post-2020 GBF. So we're worried about the lack of scientific indicators and measurement tools to measure the progress and the parameters of integrated measurements for effective and efficient biodiversity in order to achieve the living in harmony with nature vision by 2050. We will send specific comments in writing.
Thank you, Chile. We will now have Bangladesh, followed by Costa Rica and Uganda. Bangladesh, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bangladesh appreciates the CBD Secretariat to come with the detailed document on the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health in CBD/SBSTTA-24/9. The document has been developed in collaboration with World Health Organization. My delegation stressed on the biosafety and biosecurity issues to be taken into account in the 17B under the principles of the action plan, where a holistic consideration of the health of all people as well as animals and other organisms are pronounced. Hence, Bangladesh proposes para 17E with the text that the action plan will be considering biosafety and biosecurity issues, ensuring the safeguards for biodiversity in all the anthropogenic research, development, and commercialization activities involving any living organism. Similarly, biosafety and biosecurity issues to be considered under Action Area 1.1 and 1.2, as well as Element 3 in education and awareness on health and biodiversity linkages. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bangladesh. We will now take interventions from Costa Rica, Uganda, and Ecuador. Costa Rica, you have the floor. Costa Rica. Please give Costa Rica the floor. Yes, you may begin. Thank you. Costa Rica, we are unable to hear you. Costa Rica, you may take the floor now. Okay, so they seem to be having difficulties. In the meantime, while we work this out, we will continue with Uganda, and we will hopefully get back Costa Rica just now. Uganda, you have the floor. They've disappeared as well. Okay, Uganda, you may begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Uganda joins the other parties in noting that biodiversity and health are closely interrelated. Hence, we welcome the draft action plan on biodiversity and health and emphasize the need for strengthening mainstreaming and synergies in biodiversity and health. We underline the importance of the One Health approach, focusing on preventive action and promoting safe health with the inclusion of biodiversity. The pandemic has shown the importance of nature to countering the health impacts associated with the pandemic. Uganda thus supports Brazil in emphasizing that the third objective of the CBD should be prominent. There is need for expeditious, fair, and equitable sharing of benefits, including access to affordable treatment for those in need, especially in developing countries, in accordance with Article 8B of the Nagoya Protocol. This will call for waiving of patents on the vaccines as of necessity to enable global access to the vaccines. We also emphasize the role of biotechnology research, which is essential for the rapid development of medical biotechnology, and hence technology transfer and funding to capacity building are important. We support Argentina's proposal for bracketing of the text in the annexes until these issues are properly negotiated to enable us to come up with a text that we can actually move forward with. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. We'll now hear from Costa Rica. Costa Rica, you have the floor. Okay. Costa Rica, you have the floor. We're not hearing you. Okay, we'll give you a minute again. Costa Rica. Okay, so we can't hear you, so then we'll go on with Ecuador, and then we will try you again afterwards. Ecuador, you have the floor. Thank you. Ecuador, we cannot hear you. But it looks like we've given you the floor. Can you speak, please?
You hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches.
Good time of day, distinguished delegates and Madam Chair. Ecuador thanks the Secretary for its work and also the work carried out by IPBES in holding the workshop on biodiversity and pandemics and the various contributions to this. However, we'd have liked to have had a bit more time to analyse the document, and we hope to be able to actively contribute at future negotiations soon, and that links up with what has just been said by the delegates of Canada, Brazil and Argentina. it is fundamental to have a holistic vision on the relationship between humanity and biodiversity so that we can live in harmony with nature and also within the framework of the objectives of the Biodiversity Convention. In the light of this important environmental crisis and diversification of the various anthropogenic effects. Given this, we take note of the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, which appears in the annex, the document CBD/Substa/24/9. However, this action plan and the One Health approach brings together work from various conventions and international and national fora. We need to facilitate the funding and have capacity building and technology transfer, in particular in mega diverse countries that are also developing countries, such as we have taken note in past and present actions in the face of COVID-19. When it comes to the references to Build Back Better, we need to actually change the translation in Spanish where it says urgent actions to build back better. We have to take account of the Sendai framework. And when it comes to the texts put forward in the plan, we have various amendments, including avoiding making reference to terminology that has not been validated by the CBD, such as nature-based solutions. And then we will send in the other modifications in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ecuador. We'll try Costa Rica again. I see they have two hands up here, so if one doesn't work, we'll try the next one. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Costa Rica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Costa Rica thanks the Secretariat for the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health and the relevant documents on biodiversity and health and the interlinkages. Emergent diseases have shown the strong links between biodiversity and climate change and human health. Infectious diseases have direct effects on human mortality, and also there are high financial costs related to these diseases caused by these agents, and emerging diseases can cause health and financial problems, but can also turn into endemic, and that can then have long-term effects. When it comes to transmission of infectious agents, that's often brought about by biodiversity changes, and this actually increases the poverty cycle. Costa Rica supports the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health, and would like to highlight the importance of certain elements. First of all, we have to include considerations related to human biodiversity when planning for land use. And then secondly, to improve regulations and the use and the trade of wildlife species. And thirdly, we need to change food and agricultural systems. And then there's the risk of pandemics, which could be reduced considerably by promoting responsible consumption and the reduction of unsustainable consumption. We also think it's important for the Global Action Plan to highlight the role of IPLCs and women, in particular in paragraph 4A. My delegation has some additional comments on the document that we'll send in writing. The COVID-19 pandemic highlights the fact that it's urgent to deal with the biodiversity crisis as well as the climate change crisis, and there needs to be transformative change. We hope that the co-chairs of the OEWG will take account of all of these comments as has been requested by their delegations. This is a very important issue and has to be reflected in the draft 0 of the post-2020 GBF. Thank you very much. And I'm afraid we did not have that text.
Now hear from South Africa. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa joins others in thanking the Secretariat on the quality of the documents in preparation of this agenda.
Excuse me, South Africa, would you please turn up your volume? It's very low. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Is it still low? I can't hear you.
Sorry. Yes, we can hear you now. So thank you. Go right ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa joins others in thanking the Secretariat on the quality of the document in preparation of this agenda. South Africa recognizes the full range of linkages between biodiversity and health, including the benefits that biodiversity and ecosystem services provide to health, the potential impacts of biodiversity loss on the health outcomes, and on the other hand, the potential impacts the health sector may have on biodiversity and the provision of ecosystem services, which are vital to humanity. The COVID-19 global pandemic has further highlighted these links and the urgent need to restore the relationship between the people and nature to build back better with a view of reducing the risk of future zoonotic pandemics. South Africa also notes the work that has been done by other organizations. Moreover, the establishment of the One Health High-Level Expert Council and panel, as well as the work that was done under the EBS, including the activities undertaken and reports produced in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. In light of the transformative change needed as part of the Building Back Better agenda, South Africa recognizes that this work contributes to a strengthened understanding of biodiversity health linkages and to raise the importance of the One Health approach, among others, and the holistic approach required as an inclusive and...
Excuse me, South Africa, the translators are having problems, so please slow down. Thank you so much. Thank you. Go right ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. South Africa further recognizes the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity into different sectors, including health and agriculture, and leveraging of biodiversity and health core benefits in halting the loss of biodiversity and for the achievement of the post-2020 global biodiversity frameworks, including its goals. Madam Chair, the emergence of COVID-19 has reframed the discussion on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Therefore, we support the inclusion of a specific target on the biodiversity and health, including the health-related indicators in the correspondence monitoring framework. South Africa knows the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health annexed to the present decision as a useful plan for leveraging biodiversity and health interlinkages, and notes that this can contribute to the implementation of the framework. We also support Argentina, Uganda, and Brazil that the Global Action Plan requires further discussion, and therefore we support the proposal to bracket it. In light of the Action Area 4.1, Activity 4.1.6, we feel that this activity can be improved to, among other things, to also facilitate the access to affordable treatments by those in need, especially for developing countries. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, South Africa. We'll now hear from the Philippines. Philippines, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My country, the Philippines, expresses its views on this agenda item, particularly the following. My delegation welcomes and endorses the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health and hopes this would pave the way for the further mainstreaming of biodiversity and health linkages into policies, strategies, programs, and accounts at all levels, and upscale efforts towards a One Health approach to the conservation of biodiversity and the promotion of health. The ASEAN region, through the efforts of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, has taken the initiative in considering biodiversity considerations in dealing with COVID-19 through the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, which serves as the region's consolidated exit strategy from the COVID-19 crisis. This framework embodies the thinking that since the pandemic is still evolving, the approach to recovery should be proactive and all-encompassing, flexible, and agile so the region can easily adopt its strategies to changing conditions. The Philippines take this framework seriously as it is a member of an interagency body created by Administrative Order Number 10, Series of 2011, dealing with zoonosis, and it is actively participating in the discussions of this committee, especially in matters relating to the current pandemic. We propose in element 1 of the plan of action, particularly in the cross-sectoral mainstreaming of biodiversity and health linkages in health, biodiversity, and environment-related policies, that the economic and finance policies be included in this effort, such that the preponderant focus of the budget on post-pandemic recovery efforts will not jeopardize the need for continuing funds to sustain the work related to biodiversity conservation. The Philippines likewise asked the Secretariat to further identify entry points in Action Area 2.1 for biodiversity and health interventions in the other sectors prioritized for mainstreaming biodiversity, as the current plan of action only focus on infrastructure and food systems. Thus, it is important that parties be assisted in identifying these entry points in forest, fisheries and aquaculture, tourism, energy and mining, manufacturing and processing, if ever there is a feasible entry point in these areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. I see no more requests for the floor from parties. Therefore, we will now move to interventions from non-parties, followed by I see Peru. I see Peru has raised their hand, so we will hear from Peru. Peru, please. The floor is yours.
Muy buenos días, señora presidenta. Muy buenas tardes. Muy buenas noches con todos.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Peru would like to recommend including in the decision, in the recommendation to COP15, to issue a call to governments and all organizations and stakeholders to include in their NBSAPs investments to prevent future pandemics and zoonoses. A call would also be issued to WHO to implement the plan of action. It is necessary to include, the interpreter regrets that the sound does not allow for complete interpretation. The action plan should then be reflected in regional and national plans with the support of WHO and other organizations. And it is necessary to draw out the linkages between biodiversity and health in order to ensure living in harmony with nature. We have demonstrated the linkage between the loss of biodiversity and health. Madam Chair, the Global Action Plan as proposed includes a number of elements and recommendations that are essential to ensuring the implementation of the post-2020 global framework. We must reverse biodiversity loss. And in order to achieve implementation of the plan, we must also include it in regional and national plans for biodiversity and health. And it is also essential for health to be included in all sectors. Therefore, we recommend passing these messages on to the post-2020 framework working group expert. It is essential to for a healthy and clean environment, and therefore we would like to include the advantages in the 2030 mission for all generations, for all stakeholders. It is essential that this be done in a sustainable fashion. And it is essential to have equitable sharing of benefits as well, where when we speak of providing for a healthy environment and mitigating the risks to humanity. Madam Chair, we have amendments to propose, and they will be sent in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now have Malaysia. Malaysia, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Malaysia thank the CBD Secretariat for preparing the draft document for biodiversity and health. Madam Chair, there are close linkages between human health, animal health, and the environment. This disorder has led to interaction between these sectors, leading to emerging and re-emerging diseases. These diseases have caused pandemic, leading to epidemic, leading to pandemic such as influenza, HIV, rabies, Ebola, and coronavirus like SARS, COVID-19, and also MERS-CoV. These diseases have also caused certain countries to become endemic, causing not only loss of human health, also loss in animal health, socio-economic impact, disruption leading to international travel, tourism, and etc. The One Health approach should be practiced by all countries in order to manage these challenges in which including zoonosis and also AMR. Madam Chair, this draft has holistically described the action plan to be carried out by all countries, governments, stakeholders in order to curb the impact of biodiversity and also health. Malaysia endorsed the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Malaysia. Thank you very much. We are about to go on a break, but prior to the break, we want to hear from WHO. And then after we come back from the break, we will hear from UNEP and FAO, along with major groups and other observers, if time allows. So please, WHO, you have the floor. WHO. I don't see WHO. I see them. UNWHO. Please raise your hand and then we can give you. Oh, great. Thank you. You have the floor and then we'll go on a break. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The World Health Organization welcomes the information contained in documents prepared under the agenda item on biodiversity and health, including the draft Global Plan of Action on Biodiversity and Health, acknowledging them as a valuable starting point. The COVID-19 pandemic and other global health crises that have preceded have brought into sharp focus the intimate yet complex relationships between biodiversity and health, our common vulnerability when these relationships are fractured, and the unprecedented urgency to translate associated biodiversity and health co-benefits into ambitious evidence-based decision-making policies, programs, and initiatives supported by robust targets and indicators as essential pillars for prevention. Strengthening cross-sectoral collaboration at the intersection of human, animal, plant, and ecosystem health, and building capacity through an inclusive whole-of-society One Health approach is instrumental to enhancing our collective capacity for prevention and preparedness, and to build resilience to present and future health risks. This need to apply lessons learned and to build back better is closely aligned with the WHO Manifesto for a Healthy and Green Recovery released by WHO last year, which includes safeguarding and restoring nature and healthy ecosystems as the first of 6 interrelated pillars. WHO commends the CBD Secretariat for the comprehensive One Health approach adopted at its 14th Conference of the Parties and for initial efforts made to operationalize this approach moving forward so as to ensure that One Health is biodiversity inclusive and aims to address the root environmental causes of both infectious and non-communicable diseases across the full spectrum of environmental and social determinants of health, including those exacerbated by biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, land use changes, pollution, and climate change. While some of these interactions are not fully understood, WHO is committed to enhancing collaboration with all health-determining sectors, including the CBD Secretariat, by working with partners to strengthen the evidence base, supporting countries through capacity development, and by strengthening interagency coordination and policy alignment. Steadfast in this commitment, WHO is also enhancing its leadership in One Health through enhanced collaboration with the FAO and the OIE by expanding the Tripartite Alliance to also include the United Nations Environment Programme and through the establishment of the One Health High-Level Expert Panel. In addition, to further enhance policy coherence across UN agencies and other stakeholders, catalyze health leadership, and support an inclusive approach to One Health across the full range of environmental and social determinants of health, WHO has also established an expert working group on biodiversity, climate, One Health, and nature-based solutions, which held its inaugural meeting on 27th and 28th of May, concurrently with the World Health Assembly. WHO chairs this new expert group together with the IUCN by building and expanding upon the work initiated under the WHO CBD Joint Work Program on Biodiversity and Health, established in 2012, and by the Interagency Liaison Group on Biodiversity and Health until December 2020. The WHO also welcomes the CBD to this expert group and strongly encourages the CBD to consider the outputs of the work of this expert working group moving forward in its proposed draft global plan of action on biodiversity and health. Key outputs of the expert working group will include, among others, the development of an operational framework on biodiversity and health and integrated indicators on biodiversity and health, to be developed in collaboration with the expert working group, including through regular consultations with the Tripartite, with the One Health High-Level Expert Panel, health focal points, regional offices, and the growing network of partners. It will be essential to ensure alignment of a prospective global plan of action on biodiversity and health with the associated operational framework on biodiversity and health to avoid duplication and to ensure policy coherence. And WHO strongly encourages the CBD Secretariat to reflect these developments in the operationalization of its draft global plan. To ensure coherence and coordination, it also encourages the CBD Secretariat to fully embed health considerations and a biodiversity inclusive One Health approach in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including through ambitious, comprehensive, and evidence-based targets and indicators. In the interest of time, WHO will also submit further comments in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, WHO. Appreciate your time. We will now take our break. It'll be 15 minutes from this time. So, well, I'm sure we can work it out ourselves. So 15 minutes break. So starting now. Thank you. See you in a bit. Please do not log off. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome back to this session on agenda item for biodiversity and health. Thank you for coming back. Please note that we are extremely limited for time. Therefore, we will only have 20 minutes left in this session. In that time, we will hear from UNEP and FAO and the major groups, which will be the IPLCs, Women's Organization, Youth, Subnational Government, and NGOs as far as possible. After that, I will hand it over to the SABSTA chair, Hezekiah, and he will give us further guidance as how we'll move on with this particular agenda item. We will now hear from FAO. Ms. Sophie Bonda-Schutz, we'll hear from you now. Thank you. UNEP, you have the floor. Please give UNEP the floor. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, Chair. UNEP has ongoing close collaboration with the Secretariat and other partners on biodiversity and health. In particular, UNEP is bringing increased attention to a holistic approach to health, working closely with WHO, FAO, OIE, and other partners to strengthen recognition of the essential role the environment plays in securing health benefits for people, nature, and animals. In UNEP's recent report, Preventing the Next Pandemic, as well as many other studies mentioned in the document under discussion, the evidence is clear. The way people interact with nature is driving up risks for human, animal, and planetary well-being. Multi-sectoral, transdisciplinary, and systemic approaches are needed to halt biodiversity loss and achieve the health dimensions of Sustainable Development Goals. The biodiversity dimensions of health are critical, and we must have coherent action to address biodiversity loss alongside other related environmental dimensions and determinants of health, including those associated with climate change and pollution. We must use all instruments available to improve health and well-being for people and planet. Our collective survival depends on it. In this respect, UNEP is promoting increased synergies with other multilateral environment agreements, and we attach great importance to working with member states to align and enhance potential co-benefits on biodiversity and broader environmental aspects of health. UNEP notes the variety of new initiatives focused on biodiversity and other environment dimensions of health, including those focused on pandemic prevention and preparedness. The One Health High-Level Expert Panel, in which UNEP is partnering with WHO, OIE, and FAO, offers specific opportunities to deliver on the draft CBD Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. We look forward to deepening collaboration on biodiversity and health with the Secretariat and parties for its implementation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UNEP. We'll now hear from FAO. FAO, the floor is yours. You may begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. FAO welcomes the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and development of the Global Action Plan to integrate biodiversity considerations into One Health approaches and mainstream biodiversity and health linkages into national policies, strategies, programs, and accounts. In the context of the current pandemic, FAO urges to acknowledge the linkages between biodiversity and emerging zoonotic diseases. Joint multidisciplinary action to improve understanding of these complex and multidimensional relationships should therefore be a priority. FAO recommends that the integrated science-based indicators, metrics, and progress measurements tools on biodiversity and health should consider environmental contribution to One Health as part of efforts to reduce the risk of future pandemics. Further, FAO recommends to provide common definitions as agreed by the tripartite plus UNEP, the One Health High-Level Expert Panel, all members of the Interagency Liaison Group on Biodiversity and Health, as well as other partners to ensure a common understanding by all involved sectors. As per request by two FAO governing bodies, the Committee on Agriculture and the Committee on Forestry, FAO is mainstreaming biodiversity into One Health approaches to prevent and address zoonotic disease threats, including antimicrobial resistance. As such, FAO is already taking actions to support the implementation of the Global Action Plan, by integrating biodiversity considerations into its program of work related to One Health, as well as promoting and facilitating dialogues on biodiversity health approaches. And FAO will also provide specific comments to the document in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, FAO. We will now have IPLCs. With IPLCs raise their hand, I believe it's Yeshin Upon. Yes, thank you.
Gracias por la palabra, señora presidenta.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm making this statement on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and also the Indigenous Women's Biodiversity Network. Mainstreaming of biodiversity and health should have the full and effective participation of IPLCs, in particular when we're talking about the involvement of our health-related knowledge, innovation practices, as well as access to our genetic resources for the development of medicinal drugs. And therefore, we recommend that consideration should be given to the decisions of the World Health Organization on traditional medicine, as well as the relevant lines of work related to this agency's strategy on traditional medicine 2014 to 2023. In the proposed draft recommendation as IFB and IWBN, we have the following suggestions. On page 6 in Spanish, after sustainable development, add with the full and effective participation of IPLCs, women and youth. Then on page 6 in Spanish, paragraph 4, in paragraph A, add after relevant, such as IPLCs, women and youth. In paragraph 5, add after health, IPLCs, women and youth. And then the paragraph would continue. On the proposed draft Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, section 4, paragraph 15, para C, to add after local communities in the generation, safeguarding and maintenance of traditional knowledge associated with the relationship between biodiversity and health, as well as to promote the participatory co-production of information and knowledge together with scientific knowledge based on mutually agreed terms, free, prior and informed consent, as well as fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the access and use of traditional knowledge. And then on page 13, paragraph 20 in English, add after WHO, the Pan American Health Organization and other relevant regional health organizations. And then on Action 2.2, page 17, English activities 2222, add after hygiene and or biosafety, and after negatively add cultural practices such as traditional rituals or food. Then on page 20, on element 3 in English, on implementation milestones, A, add after communication materials and tools, including culturally appropriate materials and in indigenous languages. Then on the same page, action area 4.1, 4.1.2, add after community-based surveillance and IPLC-based participatory monitoring as elements to prepare for pandemics. On element 5, research, after local communities add through access based on access and benefit sharing standards. In the same way, in 5.1.1, add after traditional knowledge based on access and benefit sharing standards. Then page 24 in English, implementation milestones, paragraph B, add after funding, including funding for IPLCs. And the paragraph would continue. And then finally, in paragraph C, I believe that's in 6.2.6, points out the interpreter, after in particular LDCs, for key sectors for the mainstreaming of biodiversity and health, such as IPLCs, women and youth. And we would like to respectfully request the party's support for our proposals. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, IPLCs. We'll now move on to women's organizations, FARN. The floor is yours. NGO, FARN, you may begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. I'm speaking on behalf of the CB Women's Caucus. For a transformative and just recovery, the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health for 2021 to 2030 should address and identify key rights-based approaches and the elements of the activities presented in the action plan that can truly help in catalyzing the operationalization of the biodiversity inclusive One Health transition into the post-2020 GBF. We would like to present the recommendations of the working documents, CBD Substa-24/9 as follows. On Section 4, on suggested recommendations, Para 3, we would like to add all sectors identified in the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. On Para 4, subsection A, we would like to include Indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and other relevant partners. We welcome the acknowledgement of a rights-based approach and consideration of gender approaches in the action plan in the annex. However, it is not adequately addressed. To save time, we are putting forward a few of our main recommendations. On Section 4 of the annex, on the strategic objectives and rationale of the action plan, Para 16C, after nature-based solutions, we would like to add with ecosystem-based approaches. This is also to align with the principles of the action plan set in the following Section 5. On Section 5, on principles of the action plan, we'd like to see a new addition, subsection G, which will read social justice and gender equality. This is one of the guiding principles as identified in CBD Substa 21/9. We welcome the principles of a rights-based approach, but as we still see a lack of gender-responsive elements and actions, we encourage parties to retain this principle in the action plan. On Section 6, key elements of the action plan, Element 2, on sector-specific mainstreaming of biodiversity and health linkages, Action Area 2.1, only 2 sectors have been prioritized, infrastructure and food system. There is no entry point in addressing the others, including energy and mining sectors, considering the direct impact on biodiversity and health. This needs to be included in the action plan, recognizing the associated conflict that may arise, including gender-based violence, besides others. So we recommend addressing this in new activities 2.13 energy, 2.1.4 mining, and henceforth for the other sectors identified. On Action 2.2, on mainstreaming biodiversity and health linkages and ecosystem, wildlife, and land sea use management, in Action Area 2.2.1, on land and sea use planning and ecosystem management, 2.2.1.3, we'd like to add recognizing, ensuring the governance systems of and access for Indigenous peoples and local communities. So the insertions are recognizing and the governance system. In the ongoing pandemic COVID-19, glaring gender disparities are apparent from the additional burden on women that have impacted all spheres of their lives, from social, cultural, economics, besides others. The pandemic has resulted in reports of increased tension, contributing to new cases of gender-based violence, including many linked with the environment. We cannot recover and build back better if we do not bend the curve of inequality and injustice. We welcome party support of our recommendations, and our statement has also been uploaded on the webpage. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will now go on to youth, GYBN. You may have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Global Youth Biodiversity Network wishes to stress that in order to foster the development of policies that address ecosystem, human, and animal health under the One Health approach, the biodiversity crisis must be understood as a pressing public health concern. Cross-sectoral collaborations and trust building will be necessary across all levels, and decision makers, scientists, communities, and practitioners should work with public health experts, including traditional knowledge holders in all stages of landscape management, conservation, and restoration initiatives. Furthermore, we stress that children, youth, and the coming generations are among the most vulnerable to the effects of environmental harm, with the possible long-lasting repercussions and negative impacts on children's rights to life, health, development, and to play and recreation. Urgent action must be taken, and the needs and perspectives of children and youth must be seriously considered and integrated in discussions on health and biodiversity. Moving towards an intersectional, intergenerational, and rights-based approach to health and biodiversity, and recognizing the key role that education will play, we make the following text proposals to the document. First, on the suggested recommendation in paragraph 4, subparagraph A, to explicitly mention Indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth after relevant partners at the end of the sentence. Moving to the draft Global Action Plan in the annex, on page 13, paragraph 17, subparagraph D, we suggest to add and intersectional after gender and before approach so that age and other dimensions could be captured. On page 17, subparagraph 2.2.2.3, to add development and infrastructure on the list of programs for which wildlife health should be considered, to read national development, infrastructure, and health programs. On page 21, on the implementation milestones for element 3 on education and awareness, we propose to add national education curricula to milestone C, to read education programs on biodiversity and health linkages are incorporated in national education curricula, NBSAPs, and health strategies and action plans. And on page 22, subparagraph 5.1.3, to add age and indigenous status after gender and before disaggregated data. Finally, we invite parties to revisit our statement during last year's special virtual session on biodiversity, One Health, and COVID-19, which contains many of our key messages on this important topic. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, youth, for being brief and not using all your time. So we just have time for one more and barely so. NGO regions, S4, may you take the floor, please? NGO regions. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, distingués délégués.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished delegates. It is an honor for me to represent the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments, coordinated by Regions 4 and the Government of Quebec. ICLE, the Local Governments for Sustainability, the group of leading subnational governments towards the ABTs, the European Committee of the Regions, and on behalf of the Edinburgh Process partners. Our constituencies, local and subnational governments recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the importance of the relationship between people and nature and the urgency of addressing the biodiversity crisis alongside the climate crisis. Our governments are currently on the front line of the fight against the COVID-19 crisis, since the vast majority are directly responsible for healthcare systems, as well as biodiversity and health issues. Therefore, we believe, as mentioned by Canada during its statement, we believe that the role and involvement of subnational and local governments should be reflected adequately, more adequately, in fact, throughout document CBD/Substa/24/9. We would be pleased to provide some written suggestions in that regard. We believe that the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health should support parties and other governments, including subnational and local governments, in mainstreaming biodiversity and health linkages into their policies, strategies, and programs in accordance with the One Health approach. This action plan should emphasize collaboration amongst ministries, agencies, and stakeholders, and sustain the formation of relevant bodies across all levels of government. Networks and infranational networks as well. Existing subnational and local networks and partnerships on biodiversity and health linkages should also be referred to the action plan. In addition, we believe that monitoring and surveillance capacities as well as data collection could be strengthened at the subnational and local level. This action plan should therefore support capacity building and ensure allocation of predictable and sustainable funding to subnational and local policies and programs that will promote the One Health approach. These policies and programs should be considered and included in local and subnational biodiversity strategies and action plans, along with health strategies and action plans on a voluntary basis. We firmly believe that mainstreaming biodiversity in the health sector and promoting biodiversity and health co-benefits is essential for halting the loss of biodiversity and for the achievement of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We have reached the end of this segment and actually the time allotted to me. So unfortunately, we do not have time to open the floor to other observers. However, observers are invited to upload their statements on the meeting webpage within 12 hours of the close of this plenary session. Uploaded statements will be taken into account in the drafting of the CRP or the non-paper on this agenda item. I will be now handing over the chairing to our chapter chair, Ezekiel, and he will provide us guidance as to how we will proceed with this particular agenda item. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chair. Ezekiel, I hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena, for your excellent work facilitating first reading of document on health. Dear colleagues, all parties are agreeing on the high importance of this issue. We heard significant number of additional comments for the plan and new additional elements. Let me consult with Subsidiary today on next steps, and I will inform you about suggest way forward at the opening of the plenary meeting tomorrow. Let us now return to CRP 5 on biodiversity and agriculture. Yesterday, we had approved paragraph 9, which means that we still have 3 more paragraphs to approve. I hope we can approve it expeditiously. We only have 45 minutes in today's session, so we need to do our best for all remaining documents. Now, I would like to continue to go to recommendations paragraph by paragraph. And let us start with paragraph 10. Can we approve paragraph 10? I see UK followed by Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to paragraph 10, we had some comments regarding the text towards the end of the paragraph, which is to equip additional authorities with the knowledge, etc. We felt that this text seems a bit out of place to us in a paragraph which is really about inviting the Global Environment Facility to provide support for the future implementation of the plan. And I think in footnote 3 or 2, perhaps, it suggests that this paragraph will be lifted out and placed into a separate decision relating to the financial mechanism. So we felt a specific detail, which probably, in our opinion, belongs really in the content of the plan itself, seems rather out of place to have in this this text, which is in the operational part of the decision. So our preference is, Chair, to delete that text at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. So your suggestion is to delete this part, to leave it general and hopefully clean paragraph 10. Switzerland, you have the floor, followed by Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We had, regarding paragraph 10, the last part of this paragraph mentions to equip traditional authorities. And we are not clear what is meant with the traditional authorities, and wonder if it's possible to get some more clarification on this. Thank you.
So I suppose you agree with UK's suggestion to delete that last part and to end the paragraph when we said sustainable use of soil biodiversity, full stop.
Yes, this is correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Canada followed by Belgium.
Mr. Chair, we Canada also support the intervention of the UK and Switzerland, and also we suggest to removing the global environment facility other donors as well from this paragraph. So suggest a division of the Global Environment Facility so that the paragraph reads invites donors
Canada needs to put down the arm of the mic.
in the private sector.
Thank you, Canada. Your sound is not very well, but I understand you suggest to delete the Global Environment Facility and other to delete. That is better. Thank you.
That's correct. Yes. So, sorry about that. I guess I had my microphone not up. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Belgium followed by Chile, and let's take a decision on this paragraph.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding this paragraph, I think we can agree to delete the end of the paragraph because it was not very clear for us either. And we would also like to add in the second line after capacity building to add and development with regard to the discussion under SBI agenda item 7. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Chile, ¿tiene la palabra?
You have the floor. Thank you, Chair. We'd like to make a brief comment where it says, after the comma, in particular for developing countries and economies in transition. Thank you.
Chile sería in particular for developing.
Thank you. In particular for developing countries and economies in transition. I believe that would be the correct language that we normally use. Japan now, please.
Japan, as you have no withdraw. So with this, I would like to submit for approval paragraph 10, which currently says, invites donors and funding agencies and the private sector to provide financial assistance, including capacity building and developing activities for national, subnational, and regional projects, in particular for developing countries and economies in transition that address implementation of the plan of action and so on until biodiversity. I see no objections, then paragraph 10 is amended. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And well, just to mention that we're having some connectivity issues as well. And I didn't quite understand, I guess that the reference to the Global Environmental Facility was removed. Is that correct?
That was a suggestion to delete Jeff and to keep open to donors and funding agencies. That was the suggestion.
Yes, but well, from our perspective, since Jeff operates under Article 21 of the Convention, we would rather keep the reference to the Global Environmental Facility here in paragraph 10, I'm sorry.
Okay, understood, Brazil. Thank you very much. So I would like to ask for flexibility of parties to keep the name of the Global Environmental Facility. In understanding is that is a financial instrument of our convention to live as it was originally. I hope not to have brackets. So I hope we can keep invites Jeff, other donors and funding agencies as originally in the paragraph, and just to include insertions and development of activities, and also countries with economies in transition, and deleting the very last part. I hope you can accept this formulation. I hope there is no objection. Keeping Jeff. I see Colombia. I hope it's not an objection. Colombia tiene la palabra.
You have the floor, Colombia.
So would like to keep this reference at the beginning of the paragraph. Thank you.
Gracias, Colombia.
Thank you very much, Colombia.
This paragraph 4, approval. I see no objections on paragraph 10, then is adopted as amended. It's approved. Now I open the floor to approve paragraph 11. I see no. I see Belgium. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In the second line, we would like to recall some language that was in the paragraph before in order to not have too many information streams at the same time. And this language comes after the plan of action. And it says, in alignment with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is so that the information is aligned with the information from the GBF and we don't have several streams at the same time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. I see no more requests from the floor from parties. I have an NGO requesting for the floor. Please be, okay, thank you very much. We need to move, we have very little time to move on. I submit for approval paragraph 11 as amended. I see no more requests from the floor. In the interest of time, I do appreciate participation of observers, but we are now at the CRP moment to deal with this specific, so I thank your understanding. Paragraph 11 is approved. Now I open the floor to paragraph 12, the last paragraph of the operative section. I see no request from the floor, then paragraph 12 is approved. With this, the section on recommendations is approved. As you know, colleagues, this item considers the Plan of Action 2020-2030 for the International Initiative for Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity, which is included as an annex to the CRP. This Plan of Action was initially prepared jointly by the Secretariat of the Global Soil Partnership at FAO and is based on the findings of the report on the state of knowledge and on soil biodiversity. The plan went through a peer review process as per notification 2020-24, and comments received from the informal and formal plenary sessions of this item have been incorporated into the plan, which have notably improved it. I thank you all for your valuable suggestions. The changes include: it has been made explicit that all actions in the plan are voluntary and in accordance with national circumstances. Reference to the restoration have been added. The management practices for conservation and sustainable use of soil biodiversity have been broadened. Actions have been out to identify resources for the implementation of the plan and to encourage development of benefit-sharing mechanisms relate to soil organisms. An action has been added that aims to improve the mapping capabilities of parties, among others. To make the best use of our limited time, I seek your cooperation and flexibility to approve the annex as it is. So I submit its approval as it is with all these amendments. I see Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I do appreciate our efforts and the efforts of the Secretariat to compile all the comments that we have received, we still have some comments, we still have some concerns regarding some of the activities within some sections of the action plan. So from our perspective, we would rather discuss it. Of course, given the length of this document, this may pose additional challenges, but for the sake of transparency and inclusivity, we do find it important to discuss it here in the plenary. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Brazil. It's a lot of background noise, unfortunately. So can you repeat exactly your suggestion? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I said that we appreciate your efforts and the efforts of the Secretariat to compile all the comments, but we still have some concerns regarding some of the activities, and we do find it important to discuss the action plan here in the plenary. were you able to capture what I said?
Yes. So it means you cannot approve as it is now.
Yeah, unfortunately, right. I cannot approve.
Okay. Thank you, Brazil. Since we have this, I would like to give more comments of time. I suggest that we bracket the annex and approve the CRP in brackets, and then we can see in the further version this document later. México tiene la palabra.
Have the floor, Mexico. Thank you, Chair. And we're going to find the document. Mexico has identified that in the different paragraphs of the annex, there's 32 different categories of actors that are mentioned, and it's not homogeneous in all of the different paragraphs. So I think the document would really benefit from the Secretariat being able to revise these different categories so that it could be more approved and homogeneous in these different paragraphs. Because if we've got similar terms that are a bit different, we talk about academics, we talk about research institutes, landowners, land managers, farmers, and so on and so forth. So it creates a great deal of confusion throughout the different paragraphs. And as I've said, there's 32 different categories, which doesn't really help with the clarity of the text. That's all I wanted to see. Thank you very much, Mexico. And I'd like to invite the Secretariat to take that on board when preparing the document for the next version. So the document is then approved with the amendments and with the annex in brackets. So that closes the discussion on this agenda item. I see that Friends of the Earth, that NGO, is asking for the floor. Thank you for that request, but you'll understand that we've got 30 minutes left only to go through various documents. So thank you very much for your understanding. And you can send in your comments in writing, of course. I'll give the floor now to Colombia. Thank you very much, Chair. We agree with the arguments that have already been raised by Brazil and also Mexico. And unfortunately, we are not able to review the annex. We understand that time is ticking away, and we will send in some comments in writing that we have specifically on the annex. Thank you very much, Colombia.
He is approved. Dear colleagues, we will turn now our attention to next agenda item on CRP 8 on synthetic biology. I will explain how I propose to proceed. First, we will listen to a report back from the Friends of the Chair group, which I established at the plenary on the 26th May. This group of friends was mandated to address the issue of new and emerging issues as it relates to the topic of synthetic biology. Second, we will listen to a report from the co-chairs of the contact group for this agenda item, which I established during the plenary on May 23rd. The contact group was mandated to work on the elements of the draft recommendation that relate to the process of horizon scanning. After hearing back from these two groups, we will consider CRP 8 on synthetic biology, which was developed based on comments received during the informal session in February, our plenary on 23rd May, and inputs from the Friends of the Chair and the contact group. Now I invite my colleague in the Subsidiary Bureau, Helena Brown, who facilitated the meeting of the Friends of the Chair group, to report on the work. Helena, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good time of day to everyone, dear colleagues. I had the pleasure to facilitate the group of friends convened by the chair of SBSTTA on the 31st of May 2021. The group of friends comprised of friends from Finland, Canada, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Austria, Japan, Australia, Norway, South Africa, and the European Union. We met once and had a robust exchange and common understanding of the history to these discussions and the need for us to resolve this outstanding matter. Consistent with the mandate that was given to us by the chair of SBSTTA, we were able to work on a text proposal to support SBSTTA on making its recommendation to the COP on the relationship between synthetic biology and the criteria on new and emerging issues, as contained in paragraph 12 of the Decision 9/29. This proposal has been incorporated into CRP 8 on synthetic biology. I would like to thank all the friends who worked constructively together in the spirit of trust to provide a suitable resolution to this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helena, for your very hard work and dedication, as well as the group of my friends. Let's continue now with the report of the contact group on synthetic biology. Now I invite Ms. Nakatseni Shidada from South Africa to report on the work done by the contact group. Ms. Shidada will be presenting the report on behalf of the co-chairs. Shidada, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good day, dear delegates. I had the pleasure to co-chair the contact group on synthetic biology. The group met twice after it was established by the SBSTTA chair, and we had intense and productive discussion on very important issue. Our mandate include to work on paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the annexure of the draft recommendation, which are now reflected in the CRP as paragraph 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10. The group worked on the basis of the 9-paper prepared by the co-chairs with support from the Secretariat. During our session, we discussed paragraph 4, 5, 6, and 9 as reflected now on the CRP, as well as the annexure. The task ahead of us was a challenging one, including an annex with parts A and B and a table. Therefore, in spite of our efforts, we did not manage to cover paragraph 6, 10, and the table 1 of the annex during our contact group session. I am, however, pleased to report that the group made good progress, especially on the issues around the process for horizon scanning, monitoring and assessment, and the multidisciplinary ad hoc technical expert group. I would like you to note that there are still unresolved issues on paragraph 4, 5, 6, and 9, paragraph D and F of the CRP, as well as on parts A and B of the annex. Some of these issues are related to the length and the periodicity of review of the horizon scanning process, as well as the need for the multidisciplinary technical expert group. I would like to highlight, Chair, that the main achievement of the group were on advancing discussion around the process of horizon scanning, monitoring and assessment of the most recent technological development on synthetic biology, as well as requested mandate you gave us. Finally, I would like to thank my co-chair, Mr. Werner Schenkel, for his work and support in addressing this task, and to all the delegates for their cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shidada and Mr. Schenkel, for your very hard work and dedication, as well as on the entire contact group. Colleagues, we have now heard from the two groups contribute to this CRP. I remind you to get to this point, you went through intense negotiations and discussions, and therefore, when considering the CRP, I urge you to refrain from making interventions that will reopen issues that have been already discussed during either of these two groups. We will attempt now to resolve some of the outstanding issues as we go through the CRP, and I count on your support to move this process forward. I would like to invite comments on paragraphs where there is an opportunity to agree upon and to try to remove the square brackets where we can, as well as on sections of the CRP that were not subject to discussion on the contact groups because no divergent views were expressed during the first reading. We have very few minutes to continue. Now, before going to the document paragraph by paragraph, I was informed that it was a situation, some problems in communication with Argentina. And so I look for some advice on this from Secretariat. If you want to take the floor, Secretariat, just to be sure that we address this point properly. Sasha, please.
Chair, you may wish at certain point of time at this plenary maybe to read those paragraphs 10, 11, and 12 that Argentina can capture the changes, as well as probably repeat the solution on the annex. And then, of course, Argentina will have an opportunity to provide any further comments.
Right.
When we come to L document, but our understanding is that the agenda item was closed by you.
Yes, thank you, Secretariat. What I suggest in interest of time is that Secretariat provide exactly how the 3 paragraphs were adopted with modifications, and also to inform Argentina that the decision on the annex was to leave it in brackets and for the next round, let's say, when the L document. So please, Secretariat, send to Argentina with modification, and that is how document was approved already. But if they have any additional comments, they are welcome in the understanding the problems of communication.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We will do accordingly.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to go to this document paragraph by paragraph. So the first preambular paragraph, starting with recalling decisions, was agreed by the friends of the chair. Please take the floor only if you have concerns on this paragraph. I see no request for the floor, so this paragraph is approved. Paragraph 1, preambular. Second preambular paragraph started with recalling substa. Yes, recommendation 23.7 was agreed by the friends of the chair. Do you have any objections to this paragraph? I see no objections. Then this is approved. The third preambular paragraph, starting with noting the analysis, was also agreed by the friends of the chair. Are there any objections to this paragraph? Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We don't have any major problems, but we just note that the second part of this paragraph is a repetition of the first paragraph under point A1. And we wonder if it is really necessary to repeat this information twice. So either we delete it in the preambular, either we suggest deleting it in the first paragraph under A. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. So you suggest to keep this paragraph as it is and delete the similar paragraph on A, you said? Just to be sure. Belgium? If you don't have, so your suggestion is later delete this redundancy when we go to operative parts. So now I give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, once again. And well, I do understand that it might be a bit redundant having two references to the analysis of the criteria. We do find it important to keep paragraph 1 in section A, given the fact that it's an operative paragraph, and of course, it's stronger than only having a preamble paragraph. And we have very extensive discussions on this issue during the Friends of the Chairs meeting. So perhaps in the preamble paragraph, we could delete the last part, recognizing the various challenges which is already captured in paragraph 1 of section A, and have only the first part, noting the analysis on the relationship between synthetic biology and the criteria for new and emerging issues.
Thank you, Brazil. If this deletion is accepted and the understanding that we want to avoid redundancies, I submit for approval paragraph starting with noting as amended. I see no objections, then is approved. Now let's go to next paragraph. Well, let me tell you something. In the next 6 paragraphs of the preamble were not discussed in the contact group. So can we accept these preambular paragraphs as they are? Most of these ideas were proposed through statements, and I hope it's acceptable. Brazil, followed by Canada, twice Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry to take the floor once again. Yes, we didn't have enough time to address and discuss those other preamble paragraphs, and we would like to request deleting the paragraph starting with noting the relevance of DSI for synthetic biology. As we understand that in previous COPs, we decided to discuss those two issues, DSI and synthetic biology, separately. So we struggle to see the rationale behind adding this reference to DSI in the preamble, given the fact that there are ongoing discussions on DSI in other fields in other areas of work of the convention. So we would like to just lead in the paragraph on DSI in the preamble.
Thank you very much, Brazil. So I'd like to submit the adoption of the 5 paragraphs on the preamble, but I give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to take you back just for a second to preambular paragraph 3. Of course, if the room wishes to make the change suggested, we won't push back. But I would just like to note that in the Friends of the Chair meeting, I thought this was a paragraph that we had all agreed on, and so I'm puzzled why we have certain delegates coming back and reopening that paragraph. I thought that was clean text, but of course we're in your hands. And as you say, if that is the agreement, we won't push back, but we just hope that this will not be happening throughout our discussion today. That text that we had worked hard on in Friends of the Chair and had ultimately agreed on, that we're not going to reopen it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. Certainly you are right. This was a text agreed by the group, but if it's already adopted, and I thank flexibility from all, and I'll be more careful on this point to respect the work of the Friends of the Chair or the contact group. I understand the rationale is for this deletion is to avoid redundancy, not necessarily on the content. So I thank your flexibility, and let's continue with this point, because this is related to further paragraphs that probably were not considered together. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I note the comment from Brazil, who would like not to have redundancy with this paragraph, noting the relevance of digital sequences information. And as we are a little bit of the same point of view, that we don't want it that this topic is discussed in many different issues. Instead of deleting this paragraph, we would maybe just add at the end and emphasizing the need for coordinating, complementary and non-duplicative approach on issues related to DSI. And so it would still remain in this text, but giving the hint that we don't want to have duplicated issues. That would be maybe a compromise. Thank you.
Can you repeat your language suggestion?
Yes, with pleasure. A new part of this sentence would be and emphasizing the need for a coordinated, complementary and non-duplicative approach on issues related to DSI.
Thank you very much, Belgium. I will ask Brazil if it could be acceptable with this amendment to retain a mention of DSI. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, unfortunately, I cannot. I do appreciate the efforts of the distinguished delegate from Switzerland to try to find some middle ground. But as I said, what we're trying to address here is that the fact that DSI and synthetic biology are being discussed separately. So it is our understanding that we do not find it important to highlight DSI here in this decision. So we would stick to our original position on deleting the paragraph on DSI. And just to react to my dear and distinguished colleague from Canada, we fully support comments made by Canada and I guess Australia that we do not find appropriate to reopen the paragraphs that we discussed in the Friends of the Chair meeting. And my proposal was only a reaction to the suggestion by Belgium, because we understand that, well, we need to keep both paragraphs and we're trying to find some compromise. But I fully support the comments made by Canada that we should stick to the language that was approved by the Friends of the Chair meeting.
That's correct. Thank you very much to all for your understanding and to respect the work of the groups. I would like to submit the adoption of these 6 paragraphs, keeping in brackets the paragraph on digital sequence information with the amendments suggested by Switzerland. I see Mexico. ¿Tiene la palabra?
You have the floor, Mexico. Thank you. Chair, can you hear me now? Yes, please go ahead. Thank you. We'd just like to make a comment. We agree with the proposal from Switzerland. And we think this paragraph has to be kept in that indicates the relationship between digital sequence information and synthetic biology. We recognize that discussions on DSI have not yet concluded, but independent of that, we consider that digital information in the work related to synthetic biology. Thank you very much. Thank you. So that's why I'm saying that we'll adopt the 6 paragraphs and leave in square brackets the reference to DSI. Yes, we can support that. Thank you very much. Mexico, is there any opposition to us adopting these 6 paragraphs with the paragraph in square brackets? Argentina, you have the floor. Chair, thank you very much for giving us the floor. It's the first time that we're able to participate in this discussion. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to comment on biodiversity and agriculture because of our connection. None of them have worked from the 5 points in Argentina we haven't been able to follow. So we'd like to express, as we've said in the scenario note, that we have the right to introduce modifications during the next few hours. And please send us the text as agreed by the parties this morning, and then we will introduce modifications if that's necessary. And we haven't been able to follow discussions on synthetic biology up until now. We've just got into the platform now, unfortunately. So given all of this, unfortunately, Argentina cannot agree with anything that has been agreed up until now until we are able to see exactly what has been discussed and what the rest of the parties have considered to be appropriate. Thank you very much, Argentina. Now, before we start a discussion on this document, we asked the Secretary to send you in writing how we actually approved the last 3 paragraphs of the other document, and that we decided to maintain the whole of the annex in square brackets. And of course, because of the connectivity limits, you will have the opportunity to send in comments on those paragraphs referred to in the document on agrobiodiversity. And I do hope that you'll be able to stick with us and stay with us while we're discussing this document now on synthetic biology. So I'd like to put for your consideration the approval of these 5 paragraphs and to leave the reference to digital sequence information in brackets. So 6 paragraphs, corrects the speaker. I don't see any objections, so these preambular paragraphs have therefore been approved. And we can then go on to the next section, the operative part, section A.
For new and emerging issues associated and associated criteria. Paragraph 1 was extensively discussed during the Friends of the Chair. I would like to approve this paragraph as it is now. Are there any objections? I see none, so paragraph 1 is approved. Paragraph 2. The Friends of the Chair were close to agreeing on this paragraph. I would like to resolve the text in brackets. Please request the floor if you can offer a way forward. Finland, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, let me first express, of course, my gratitude to the fact that Finland was invited as a friend of your group, as a Friends of the Chair, and of course many thanks to all colleagues there and also to Helena Jeffrey Brown. We would like to say, and I try to be as brief as possible, we would like to suggest the following to paragraph 2 as a compromise. We would be ready to accept the whole text without brackets. Of course, it will then need some linguistic ands and commas, and this would be our suggestion for a compromise, lifting all the brackets from this text. I will give you more reasoning behind this if you so wish, but in the interest of time, I hope this is enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Finland. So the suggestion is to remove all brackets.
Yes, in paragraph yes. 2. Indeed. Paragraph.
Thank you very much for the proposal. So I submit for approval paragraph 2, deleting all brackets. I see Brazil, followed by South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry to take the floor once again. But regarding the last brackets, we understand that the more appropriate the language would be recognizing that synthetic biology has not been determined to be a new and emergent issue. And we understand this as a logical conclusion that if we're not able to apply the criteria for new and emergent issues set out in Decision 9/29, then synthetic biology has not been determined to be a new and emergent issue. So we'd only be able to leave the brackets if this amendment is made in the last brackets. And then I could repeat just to make it clear that from our perspective, the last bracket should read as follows: recognizing that synthetic biology has not been determined to be a new and emergent issue.
Thank you very much, Brazil. To be or not to be, right? So let's delete or not to be to make it clear. Yeah. I hope with this we can approve paragraph 2. Please, I see hands. I hope there are not objections. If you are supporting, please refrain to ask for the floor. Meanwhile, I give the floor to South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
South Africa's view is that
the operational definition of synthetic bio is so broad that it needs to be further defined in order for us to determine new and emerging issues. The synthetic biology as it's currently defined is not new and emerging, but there are categories within it that could be defined as new and emerging issues. And therefore, we would want the bracket to remain until we have resolved paragraph in the Annex E 1D. Once we have resolved that, then we can reconsider the lifting of brackets in this paragraph.
All right. So you mean to keep only the last bracket?
Chair, no, we are still considering whether it is a new and emerging issue or whether we keep the synthetic biology under review.
So you keep bracket back to South Africa?
Yes, until we have resolved the later paragraph. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Given this situation, I propose to adopt paragraph 2 with all brackets inside. Is there any objection to approve paragraph 2 with all brackets? I thank Finland for the intent, but I see that in the interest of time, we have 1 or 2 or 3 minutes more, and we need to be efficient. I see Colombia and Finland. Is there an objection to adopt paragraph 2 with all brackets? Is Colombia objecting? No, I see no more hands. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Paragraph 2 is approved with all brackets inside. Now I submit paragraph 3. Is there any objection? I see no. Paragraph 3 is approved. Now we move on section B, process for broad and regular horizon scanning monitoring assessment. Just give me a few seconds, please, because we are on time. I don't know how longer do we have. If we have a few minutes more, please, I request.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes more.
3 minutes more. Okay. On section B, paragraph 4, this touches the issue of the periodicity of the horizon scanning process. It was discussed in the contact group, but I would like to resolve text in brackets. Please request the floor if you can offer a way forward. So floor is open on paragraph 4. Help. Togo, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding this paragraph, we think that it is desirable to take an approach that allows us to follow the work as being done to see whether the cycle of horizon scanning is feasible. So we would like to keep a single cycle, not 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Togo. So your proposal is to have a single cycle, right?
C'est ça, justement.
Exactly.
I mean to keep the last text on one intersessional period.
Yes.
Yes. Can we go along for one intersessional period in the understanding that then COP will decide how to proceed? Can we adopt paragraph 4 indicating one intersessional period? I see Germany followed by South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Germany thinks that it is necessary to allow a well-informed decision for adaptation optimization of the process. And so we need to have at least 2 cycles to have such a decision to be well-informed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. I give the floor to South Africa.
Chair, thank you, Chair. We would prefer 2 cycles, so we support Germany's position there, but we could compromise to say initially, as the wording in the first bracket, and for an initial period, for an initial first cycle, where then SBSTTA can reconsider continuing it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your suggestion. I hope this can be a compromise to say of the annex for an initial first cycle period. Is that acceptable? I see Brazil, Switzerland, and Italy asking for the floor. We are running out of time. I'm wondering if we can adopt this compromise for an initial first cycle and then to let COP to decide. I see your hands still on. I assume those are objections to my proposal. I see Brazil still and Switzerland. If not, we will have to approve with all brackets.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry to take the floor once again. Brazil supports Togo's proposal, and although we do understand the rationale behind the word initial, we understand that the word initial might be a little tricky because we would be assuming that we need to have an after step, a step afterwards to continue with this process. And just another comment, Brazil would like to draw attention to the fact that Ecuador and Argentina have been unable to follow the discussions under this agenda item, and they have highlighted this in the chat. So just to keep it noted from the Secretariat and provide them with an opportunity to check the amendments and provide further comments for the sake of transparency and inclusivity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. We understand, and as you know, when there are problems in connectivity, parties will have the right to send comments in written to continue with everybody. I have to close the session. We are over time, unfortunately, and I will leave this paragraph open for consideration tomorrow. Tomorrow will be our last plenary session. Still many CRP documents pending. I hope we can make significant progress on this document in order to open discussions on risk and hopefully also on invasive species, given the privilege for contact groups and friends of the chair that were working to help us to move our discussions. And I also will provide you feedback from my consultations with the Bureau in how to proceed with the annex for agriculture and so on. So I do thank you very much to all and see you tomorrow. And I hope we can make significant progress. Thank you very much to all. The session of today is adjourned.